morning, everyone, and thank you so much for coming today to this really important webinar, which is going to launch the Notice Me, Think About Me, and Ask About Me animation and accompanying materials. We have a really interesting range of speakers. We're hearing from children and from mothers and from key people involved in this work. So thank you so much for your care and attention and commitment by attending this webinar. It's now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, who's actually Minister Helen McEntee, our Minister for Justice, and she would love to have been with us today, but she wasn't able to do it live, so she has done a pre-record, which I'm sure you will really enjoy listening to.
Good morning and a warm welcome to you all. Thank you to Anya Costello, your National Coordinator, and all of the team at Barnardos for the invitation. I'm so sorry that I can't join you in person, but I really appreciate the opportunity to contribute and to play a small part in launching Notice Me, Think About Me, Ask About Me. Domestic violence is, we all know, a huge problem, and we know most victims are women, but it very rarely stops there. Research done a few years back by Women's Aid in 2014 found 73% of women in Europe who have experienced either physical or sexual violence by a current or previous partner have also indicated that their children have become aware of the violence. That's almost 3 in 4. That's a significant amount of children who are exposed to domestic violence and who subsequently become victims or survivors. Further research suggests that children who grow up in families affected by domestic violence also have a much higher risk of poor mental health, of educational difficulties, and they're often at a higher risk of being involved in criminal behaviour. Children who are affected by domestic violence in their homes are also at a higher risk of their future relationship encountering similar difficulties. Some studies suggest that witnessing domestic violence can be as impactful as being directly abused. So the research is there, the facts are there. It is clear on the harmful effects experiencing domestic violence has on children. What is more opaque is the resources and the supports to help these victims or to support others in recognising the signs. Almost 2 years ago, I launched Zero Tolerance, our third national strategy to combat domestic sexual and gender-based violence. For the first time in a national domestic sexual and gender-based violence strategy, the child is recognised as a victim, as a survivor of domestic violence in their own right. The strategy ensures the provision of child protection services and of a wraparound support service across all relevant agencies. And we are working to ensure that all professionals and frontline workers involved in domestic sexual and gender-based violence work with children in the courts and in the justice, legal and policing systems, that they have the skills and the understanding that they require. In developing the new strategy, consultations were carried out with Barnardos to ensure that the voice of the child was heard in relation to what actions needed to be taken to tackle all forms of domestic sexual and gender-based violence. And so it is fitting that your initiative also focuses on the voice of the child and supporting professionals to help and to support. The animated video is so beautiful, but it's also heartbreaking in equal measure. The guidance leaflet is a very welcome addition in helping to equip professionals with the tools, the knowledge, the empathy required to intervene effectively with those families, with the children and the babies that are affected by domestic violence. I have no doubt that these assets will make a real impact. And so I want to acknowledge the Childhood Domestic Violence and Abuse Project team, thank those who are working in early years services and the infant mental health and specialist domestic violence services. Thank you so much for your dedication in helping to develop this project. And of course, to the mothers who were involved. This simply would not be possible without your love, without your bravery, and without your help. So thank you to all of you.
And thank to you, Minister, for your heartfelt contribution and to launching this key resource. And I would also like to say from all of us involved in this important area of work that your leadership and commitment in the area of domestic violence, and now to ensuring that children are seen as victims and survivors of domestic violence in their own right, is to be highly commended. So thank you for that. It's now my pleasure to introduce Anya Costello, who's, I think, familiar to many of you listening in on this webinar. And Anya is the National Coordinator of the Childhood Domestic Violence and Abuse Project. Been with Barnardos for 16 years in a variety of roles. We're very lucky to have her. And what Anya's going to talk to is the process for the development of the resource. And I think many of you will know of Anya's commitment and her passion in this area. So really looking forward to hearing you speak, Anya.
Thanks, Suzanne. And it is really great to be here today. This has been a long labour of love to get to this point where we're launching this project here today. We started this project in about 3 years ago when we started to kind of reflect on, we've been raising the voice of children in domestic violence and abuse who can speak for themselves. But what about children under the age of 5 who maybe don't have the words or the ways to communicate how domestic violence and abuse looks like to them? So when we started on this project a number of years ago, we decided to really reflect the aims of the overall project, which is to increase the visibility of childhood domestic violence and abuse. So this project was established in 2019 in partnership with TUSLA and more recently COON, and to support a collective and collaborative approach in identifying the needs of children and the needs of all children from conception right through to adulthood. So all the work of the project to date over the last 5 years is informed by a child's rights perspective, in particularly Article 12 and Article 19 of the UNCRC. Article 12 states that every child has the right to say and think what should happen and to have their views listened to. And that includes all children from birth right through to 18. Article 19 of the UNCRC recognises that all children have a right to be protected from all forms of violence, abuse and neglect. Over the last number of years, we established the Empowered Kids project in order to meet that need to raise the visibility of children as directly as victims in their own right. You can check on the Barnardos website for the many resources that children and young people from around Ireland have created that really highlights their lived experience of domestic violence and abuse. We then established the Listening to Young Children steering group when we decided to look at the experience of young children aged 0 to 5. And this was a huge team effort. It would not have been possible without our partners. So here today we have Trish Hurley, Let's Grow Together, Michelle Woods from Drogheda Women's and Children's Refuge, Emma Edgeworth in InSync in Kildare, Evian Ward and Lucy Waters from Women's Aid, Trish Keogh and Sarah Davis from Barnardos, and Mary Callanan and Kathleen Marr from Ascend Domestic Violence Service. So a huge thank you to all the services who've been on the steering group for the last 2 to 3 years. Without you, this work would not have been possible. So the process in terms of how we went about this project, as I said, we started off 3 years ago to wondering, how do we start to capture the voice of children aged 0 to 5? And the obvious place to start was to talk to mothers with lived experience of domestic violence and abuse and who were impacted at the time when their children were very young. So over the course of 12 months, we spoke to about 12 mothers and 6 in more in-depth interviews. We used the Lundy model to enhance parent participation to give voice to their young child. We then looked at what research is telling us on domestic violence and abuse. So we're privileged to have the input from Stephanie Holt, Siobhan O'Brien-Green, and here today is Wendy Bunston, who's been a great support to us along the last 3 years. We then conducted interviews with infant mental health professionals from around Ireland and focus groups and earlier services who are working with children every day in their setting who live with domestic violence and abuse. And a very, very important part of this project, and which we would not have been able to do this work, was the Listening to Young Children's project. We spent a lot of time wondering how we can capture the voice of children directly under the age of 5 years old. So we looked at what was out there, and the Mosaic approach is a tried and tested model for participation among young children. We then had a collaborative approach with the Barnardos earlier services in Drogheda, and we looked at engaging children and young people under the age of 5. And then you can look for further resources on this approach through the Hub na Nóg website. Okay, so without further ado, I'm delighted here today to announce the world premiere of notice me, think about me, ask about me. And I just want to give a little word of self-care. If some of you may be upset by some of the content that you'll see today, it is very, I suppose, impactful is the word I would use. And please reach out to your support system, either your family or own internal support network, or the services of which will be highlighted in today's webinar that are in every local area in Ireland. So.
Even while you are inside, I can feel you try to hide.
When I heard the angry noises, I stayed still. So still, it sounded like my heartbeat just stopped. But sometimes when there were angry noises, it also made me shake. And when I arrived, I was so small. Even when I did go home, I couldn't settle. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Sometimes the fighting was so big. All I could do was stay still and zone out. Mammy showed me how to blow a bubble all around us, so we felt safer. And sometimes we played together and had fun. But bubbles are light, and they burst. So I stayed very quiet until it was over, waiting to be close to Mammy again. And then you came along. I showed you how to blow your own bubble, and together we climbed inside. When I went to preschool, I saw the other children playing and having fun. I wanted to join in, but I couldn't. I didn't speak much. I didn't know many words. When I was quiet, the adults thought I was good as gold. But sometimes my feelings are all mixed up. I'd get angry and shout and scream. Then they tell me to stop. But they didn't know that I was just scared. And I don't want to be scared anymore. So please, notice me. Think about me. Ask about me. I may be small, but I feel it too.
Well, thank you to everyone who produced and worked to creating a really powerful, impactful video and animation which really shares the reality of what children in the first early years of their life can experience when they're living in situations where there's domestic violence. And I would just like to reiterate what Anya said there, that there may be many of you listening who have been impacted by domestic violence, and please do take good care of yourselves today. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Wednesday Bunston, who's somebody who may be well known to many of you. She's an Australian social worker, a family therapist, a mental health practitioner, an academic consultant. I could say a lot more about your contribution in terms of working with families and children who have been impacted by childhood trauma and living with and of which domestic violence is unfortunately a key part. And can I just say it's lovely to both welcome you and your lovely dog, Coco, and I'm looking forward to hearing you speak, as I'm sure everyone is who's listening today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure that Coco's a lovely dog, but she's a loved dog. And before I get into, I guess, the intensity of what already has been set up in terms of this presentation so far, it was lovely, I think, to see Anya's little somebody in the background in her talk. And I guess it would be nice to hold those two things in tandem, which is the enormity of what it is that we're talking about today, and is a topic that is not often talked about or thought about, alongside the absolute joyousness and delight that young children bring into our lives. So holding those two things in mind, and that's where I think this beautifully created animation actually starts with Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and it invites us to go into that mesmerizing nursery rhyme sort of space, just to start with, where it's like we think of that safe and gorgeous held space of infancy, to then be blown out of that and to feel that jarring experience of what's it like for a little one in utero to not hear the twinkle, twinkle, little star, but to hear the crashing and thunderous noise of things happening in their world that's frightening. And what this video does, when it says, notice me, think about me, ask about me, what it invites us to do as adults in the sector is to begin to tolerate the idea of thinking about, when does the life of the infant become alive in the mind of the other? And I think this is really frontier, pioneer sort of work, in that our ability to really conceive of the adult being impacted by family violence, that's not in dispute. To even think about the experience of family violence on young people is not in dispute, nor is it in dispute about children. But I think it has taken us quite some time to get to the point where we've actually been able to tolerate thinking about, what's this like for an infant? And even before that, for the infant in utero, what impact does that have on the experience of the infant in utero? What is the experience, the implications for the infant conceived through violence? So we're really going into terrain that's incredibly difficult to navigate, and very difficult to actually tolerate thinking about, and then imagining what that would feel like. And this animation really just has such a powerful cut through message, which is, this actually impacts the child, the infant, at the beginning of life, in utero, through conception, that the implications of what this means for the little one in utero, in terms of already perhaps having a startle effect, our physiological automatic response to things that are scary, things that are loud, things that are unsettling, the enormous cortisol levels that are released within in utero when a pregnant mother is experiencing frightening, scary, life-threatening events. For us to start to think about, how would that feel for the infant in utero? The twinkle, twinkle, little star, that doesn't focus. It's about, how do I survive? What do I have to do to not feel these things? And as the animation demonstrates so beautifully, what it does is, I just stay still. And when we're frightened and when we're little, we don't have any other choices but to go into a freeze state. That's how we protect ourselves, because we don't have other things coming into our environment that protect us. So the enormity of us as a sector going into a space that actually begins to think of things that traditionally it's like, oh, you're having a baby, how wonderful, what a lovely thing to happen. In this work, we know that always isn't a wonderful experience for the mother, because if the conception was through violence, was through rape, if the knowledge of finding out that you've become pregnant as a result of a sexual experience, not sexual, but a violent experience, even if it wasn't, that you are in a space, in a relationship with somebody who frightens you at times, and you're not sure whether it's okay to be in a relationship with this person. The enormity of what that does in terms of those first 9 months is just extraordinary. And it's irrefutable now. The science proves without a doubt that what happens in utero has an impact for the unborn child. It has an impact on an enormous amount in terms of like brain size. It has an impact in terms of all sorts of functioning, all that sort of stuff that we have this sort of lullaby, gorgeous sense of, oh, you're pregnant, and there's this being held and being appreciated and being loved. This is not that experience. And then for the infant, when born, coming into a world where perhaps there is ambivalence about the birth of this baby, or there's fear, or there's anxiety. All of these things that we traditionally romanticize aren't there. And from my experience as a practitioner that's talked to a lot of women about the conception of their baby, what it felt like to give birth to their baby, there's an enormous amount of anxiety. There's sometimes really ambivalent feelings, and sometimes when the baby's born, they're fallen in love with. But sometimes that doesn't happen straight away. And we as practitioners, we as the field that support this work, need to be able to start to notice what are the circumstances of this conception, what are the circumstances of what happened through the pregnancy and then through the labour of this little one. How do we think about that, the enormity of those very big, very overpowering, very scary experiences that happen in the first 9 months of life? And then what do we ask about that? How do we develop a capacity to actually really wonder with the infant, what's it been like for you? What has your time in utero been like? What has your time during the birthing process been like? What are your early years like? And what the video, the animation captures beautifully is how when one child is born and then another child is born, how there is that real kick in of a protective factor of one sibling wanting to take care of the other sibling. And that taking care of them isn't, let's play together, let's have this, oh, I've got a little brother or sister, isn't it exciting, let me show the world. But it can end up being, it's my job now to make sure that you're safe. It's my job now to protect you and to create a bubble that we can disappear into, which is an enormously big thing for an older sibling to take on board. But maybe is something that they've taken on board because that's what they've learned needs to happen in life. So it's an amazing video that I think not at the level of telling people with words what's happening, but it captures the essence of what it's like physiologically to be born into an experience that is very frightening, that doesn't have an environment that makes them feel safe. And that's not through virtue of the mother trying to do so, but it's through virtue of the level of violence and abuse in the relationship prevents that from happening. So this is a real entry into our sector of really opening up the threads along time, the threads intergenerationally that really impact this sector. At a time when, and I know in Australia, right at this moment, where we've had multiple numbers of women murdered, it's very high on the political agenda about the services getting more support and doing more to keep women safe. This video says that's just part of the story, because we have children to keep safe. We have infants to keep safe. We have an invitation to start to think about the conception story, we have an invitation to start to think about across time, how do we actually do something that brings this level of violence to an end? And the biggest thing that I think infants bring to parents is hope. Hope that maybe in the future, what you experience in your life may not be what I've experienced in my life. That my experience of being in a violent relationship isn't what I want you to experience. I want you to experience a life that's one where you can play, one where you can be noticed, one where you can be heard, and one where we can ask you, what's it like to be you? What's it like for you to be in your family? What do you make of the world? And to start being really conscious of at the very beginning of life, how do we give little ones the best possible opportunity to feel safe, to not have to survive, but to thrive, to not have to go in environments where you wrap yourself up in a little bubble, but you go into a world that sees you, that celebrates you, that enjoys you, that you don't have to shut down in order not to be seen because that's the safest option. And I suspect if we looked across the continuum, where we're talking about not just the experience of the infant, but the experience of the infant in the adult across time, that for many families that we work with, going back in time and thinking about what was it that I experienced from my parents, what is it that my child's experiencing, and what do I want for the future of my children, is a very powerful thread to follow. So what this animation does in my mind is it is an invitation for us as a sector to really be respectful of the experience of the infant and child impacted by family violence, to invite them into the dialogue, to invite them into the space and ask them, what do you need from this space? And being able to celebrate, and I think harness the hope that little ones bring into this space, because most parents love their children. Most parents want for their children to have a future that is safe and is robust and is healthy. Not all, but most. And I think when we bring the infant and the child actively into the picture, we're inviting a landscape that is much richer, that is much broader, and that might have more capacity to create healing, because for parents who have been themselves wounded by trauma and violence, their experience of what they wanted when they were small was exactly the same as what their infants want, which was to feel seen, to feel loved, and to feel safe. And I have no idea how much time I've used. I might need someone to tell me. I don't know whether I'm going over time or not. But I guess, I can be stopped at any time. But what I would sum up saying that this video does is it takes what is an enormously complex area of thinking about for the family violence sector, and is eloquent in its simplicity, and a little bit heart-rendering in terms of sort of thinking about, wow, is this what little ones feel? And how have we not noticed that? So I actually think that's probably, I don't know. Would someone like to step in and say if I need to talk more, or have I said enough?
Thank you so much, Wendy. And there's a few things that really struck me about what you said, and one which I think is so key is that sometimes we can find it very hard to tolerate thinking about this reality. I think that's really important, not necessarily for the audience here, because we're here because I think we can tolerate thinking about it, but I think particularly for the wider community, for policymakers, for politicians, because actually it is quite painful. It is quite painful I actually find it quite painful to watch that. So I think it is, if you feel it, if you let it get, it it is painful. So thank you for saying something I think is actually really important in that key point. And the other thing I think is really key that you said is that we need to provide the best possible opportunity for children to feel safe and not to have to survive, but to thrive. And you recognised as well, which is something we in Barnardos talk a lot about, because we say childhood lasts a lifetime, is to recognise that in some parents, they will still have that infant inside them. And the fact that their own needs haven't been met sufficiently throughout their life may make it very hard for them as parents. And it's why it's so important that we provide them with all the resources they need to be there.
And I think if we are able to be brave enough to ask parents, what was it like when you were little? Who was the person you went to feel safe? Who was the person that you most wanted to notice you? I think when we go back and forward in time, it's a very powerful vehicle, because some of these parents can go back and say, I wanted my mum or I wanted my dad to notice me, and they didn't. And then it's that, so how do you want your child to talk about you when they become a parent? So it's a very powerful continuum that I don't think as a sector we've actually got to head across.
I agree. And also, Asha, as you're saying that, it's also key how we support the mothers in that context, you know, who so how we can be with them in potentially their pain, in terms of what they didn't receive, and then how we can do so we've something that's really, you know, that wraps around the family. And
the beauty of being able to talk about that and tolerate talking about is then you can talk about, so in the future when you become a grandparent and your child is a parent, what do you want it to be like? What do you imagine it could be like? And what could we do now to start moving it towards that? So I think it's a vein of gold that hasn't been tapped into by this sector, because we get caught up on the big people who can speak.
Yes.
Where, like you say, the little people inside of the big people, we're desperate for people to listen to them. And if we can help them remember that, then it's like, I can maybe do that with my child.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that sense of hope and possibility, and not, you know, being with the reality of what's happened and tolerating that with all its emotional complexity. So I really appreciate it, Wendy. I think that the key messages, I think, are things that need to be heard and listened to. And I think also, you know, the calmness with which you presented it and the reality. And I actually also liked the fact that you said that it's the vast majority of parents who want to be there for their children, but it's not all. And I think that's also an important thing that we have to be able to tolerate, in fact, as well, as a society.
Yeah. And if we can tolerate it, maybe we can sit alongside a child who's being asked to tolerate it, but nobody's actually asking them about what it's like for them. We don't really see them sometimes, and I think, well, if we find it difficult to tolerate, hello, what's going on for these little ones?
Exactly.
Yep.
And actually, just to echo what you're saying there, is the children will know, they'll sense that we can't tolerate it, because they've learned those skills, haven't they?
They're very clever. Yes, they will. Yes. And if you can tolerate it, then that makes, there's a point there where it's like being with you means they're not left by themselves to tolerate it, because they've got someone who's sitting with them that's holding that emotion with them, which is what we all really want in life across the board, whatever age we are, whatever stage we are, is we've got someone that sits in a companionable space with us and says, I get what it is that you're feeling.
Exactly.
It's a very
tolerate it.
Yeah.
And not react to it and be with it. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much. And I think some speakers later on will be touching on the importance of self-care in the context of professionals, because in order to be able to be with children who have, and indeed parents who have suffered trauma, you need to be so in touch with yourself and your capacity to be with very painful emotions, as well as the hope at the other end when the appropriate services are given.
But it's a privilege, this work, and I think it's that funny thing when people say, oh, how do you do this work? And I sort of think there's incredible amount of like the privilege of being involved in people's lives, of sharing things with them that are really intimate and profound. And it's also very restorative because you see the strength of people. You see the things that they've been able to get through. They may not see that, but you see that. And it's a bit like we're asking to notice the kids. Noticing the journey of some of these families is just extraordinary, what they've been able to do. And I think that's not something they necessarily get fed back to them or see in people's faces. But I don't know about you, but for me, it's probably the same. All of us in this sector, it is such an honour to do this work. And it's like some of the families I've worked with just knock my socks off. I just think you are amazing. I don't know if I could have done what you did.
I absolutely agree. And I'm sure that all of the professionals listening in who have had the privilege of working alongside families who have been through a lot of suffering will say it's been the most worthwhile work to be alongside them in their journey towards healing and recovery. So on that note, what I'd like to say is thank you very much, Wendy. And I feel like saying, absolutely keep up the really fantastic work that you do, and the work you do in being a voice for what needs to be said and what needs to be tolerated and heard. So thank you very much.
My pleasure, and I've loved being involved with this.
Thank you. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Sarah Rush, and Sarah's been with Barnardos for several years as a frontline practitioner and a committed advocate and support children and young people and their parents. And Sarah, you joined this project in 2022, and you're now going to talk us through the development of the resources for professionals which go alongside the animation. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Siobhan, or Suzanne. Thank you very, very much. And good morning, everybody. As Wendy said, I'm honoured to have been a part of this very, very important project, highlighting the voice of the very young impacted by domestic violence and abuse. And as Anya Costello outlined already, creating this resource has been a journey over the last 3 years. It actually began before I started in this project, so very much begun by Anya. It's been a very powerful journey of collaboration and building with very brave mothers, their children, and all of our fantastic partner agencies who have been incredibly important on this journey in helping build what we now have, an animation and a practice guidance document that sits alongside it. So my piece here is to briefly introduce you to this practice guidance for professionals document that sits alongside the animation. It's a support document to use when you're using the animation in your work with children and families. And I'd like to particularly acknowledge the input and expertise of Trish Hurley from Let's Grow Together in Cork, who you will be hearing from after me, and also Jean Currid from Barnardos, both of whom generously met me online a number of times, and together we created this document that I'm gonna walk through with you. Having a domestic violence informed lens means being aware of and understanding the impact that domestic violence and abuse can have during pregnancy and on the development and well-being of babies and young children. As Wendy said, there is a hopeful message, and recovery is possible with support. So young children and their families can recover from domestic violence and abuse. Maybe the second, I am going to move on there to the second slide. You'll see 2 QR codes here on the left at the bottom, and these bring you to 2 very useful, practical, additional resources that I think will be very useful that we wanted to highlight. The first is an ebook produced by Barnardos Ireland called Responding to Trauma in Early Learning and Care, Domestic Abuse. And the second, longer but really comprehensive resource was produced by Women's Aid UK, and it's called Supporting Women and Babies After Domestic Abuse. The first key principle, notice me, involves staying informed about some of the indicators that domestic violence and abuse may be present when you're working with children and their families. We know that pregnancy is often a time of increased violence and risk for increased violence and abuse. And we also know that infants are especially vulnerable to experiences of violence and abuse in families. The mothers that bravely shared their experiences with us to help us create these resources, they shared some very brave pointers with us. They told us that sometimes they were forced to conceal their pregnancies. They also told us that during pregnancy, their babies sometimes stopped growing and showed little or no movement in utero. And many of their babies were born with low birth weight. These mums also told us that after birth, their very young, small babies were unsettled, that they had difficulty feeding and had erratic sleeping patterns, and that they often presented as being hypervigilant or zoned out, as you saw in the animation. For toddlers, we heard that these young children constantly sought closeness to their non-abusing parent, screaming when separated from them. And the mums that we spoke to also told us that their young children presented very differently when the perpetrator of the violence and abuse was present, often seeking comfort from an older sibling rather than the perpetrator. We, as Anya has already outlined, we spoke with early years educators, preschool educators, and they were invaluable. And they described young children as being often delayed in reaching developmental milestones, presenting as hypervigilant, anxious, quiet and withdrawn, or sometimes acting out. So Notice Me is a reminder to ask about the babies and the younger children in the family. The next key practice principle, think about me, emphasizes the importance of building safety and connection and providing a safe and consistent space to meet with the young child and their parent, inviting the baby or the young child into the safe space by using their name and looking at them, and the value of being present, listening and asking. We know that supporting the parent-child relationship is a really important part of recovery from domestic violence and abuse. So creating and using opportunities to model sharing delight and enjoyment in the baby and the young child will support the parent and the child to relax, to play, and to just enjoy each other. And of course, it's important to highlight using your own line management structure to share your concerns about young children and their families, and to ask for support for yourself if you feel you need it. Ask About Me is all about enhancing protection, and it's important to be aware of and keep updated about local area support services for families. Using a strengths-based focus while prioritising the protection and welfare of children, and importantly, maintaining the focus on the perpetrators as responsible for the harm that their children experience. This is the hopeful message. With support, families and children can and do recover from experiences of domestic violence and abuse. And importantly, practitioners and support services play a vital role in this. This accompanying document is available to download on the Barnardos website, www.barnardos.ie. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And it's really great to have the resource articulated in a way that's going to really help professionals working in this really important field. And in that context, it's my pleasure now to introduce Trish Hurley, who is the Infant Mental Health Coordinator at Let's Grow Together, which is an infant and child partnership in Cork. And Trish, I know you were very involved in the development of the resource, and as a frontline practitioner, and also as somebody who supervises other frontline practitioners, you're now going to talk about the use of this resource in the context of your really, really important work. So look forward to listening to you.
Thank you, Suzanne. So I'm just going to, my name is Trish Hurley, as Suzanne said. I'm the Infant Mental Health and Wellbeing Coordinator at Let's Grow Together. And I'm delighted to be able to be here to share my experiences of the project, but also the application of the animation and the leaflet in practice. So Let's Grow Together is one of the area-based childhood programs, one of 12 in the country. And we are based in Cork City, the northwest side of Cork City. And our focus is on prevention and early intervention, and really nurturing early infant relationships. So from as early as possible from pregnancy. So I got involved with the project initially really to enhance, to build resources for practitioners in this really important area, you know, to shine a light on what's happening for babies in domestic violence, and to understand the impact, to amplify these babies' voices, these pre-verbal children, and to kind of shine a light on them and how they are. And to bring this infant mental health lens to the project, to highlight the importance of creating that safe, nurturing parent and baby relationship, to build safety and connection. So I was directly involved with the project from early on, and really in the direct content planning and implementation, and it was really enjoyable. And it, you know, coming on to the meetings was a pleasure because I really felt there was I had a sense of purpose in what I was doing. So it, you know, I felt really coming on, you really know when you're in a working group that that you're in the right place, when you know that you light up in this space because it's so purposeful work. And then our team was involved as well because we were part of the practitioner focus group from the very beginning. So, and I give them some feedback from them at the end. So I'll move along quickly. This is our project. We have 4 interconnected strategies: infant mental health and wellbeing, speech and language, early years and schools, and that's underpinned with monitoring and evaluation. And we work directly with children from pregnancy right through to 4, offering one-to-one and groups supports, and then indirectly in the preschool stage and school-age children up to age 12. We work too as well, building capacity of practitioners in our community. So all those, you know, working at different stages with children in their lifespan are speaking the same way in relation to infant mental health language and infant mental health approaches. And this integration is a big key part of our organisation. And this is a sense of where we're going to touch parents, and we're going to be able to use the animation and the leaflets in action with parents, because we work with them from pregnancy in that hopeful space, as Wendy was saying, right through into the early years, one-to-one and in groups. So we will have opportunities to use these in real time in the intimate space of home visiting in particular, where the more families with greater needs present. So again, as well, we'll also do the capacity building, and this is an overview of where we will bringing these resources into action in our foundational infant mental health foundational trainings, in our early years mentoring, in our network groups, in our newborn observational tool training, PEEP training, when we're working with undergrads and postgrads in universities, and then of course in clinical supervision, reflective practice supervision. So the animation and leaflet resources are used together. And the research tells us that in domestic abuse really has focused in on adult victims. So we're really shining the light, as I said, on children, bringing awareness to the fact that children are never too young to feel the impact of domestic violence. And I may be small, but I feel it too, that powerful phrase in the animation, and that we're giving a voice to the unborn baby and young child. And early experiences, we know from the research, affect the development of brain architecture, which provides the foundation for all future learning experiences. So what happens early really matters. So prevention and early intervention really is crucial. And Jack Shankoff would say it's better to get it right for the first time than to fix it later. So really being comfortable in the discomfort, as Wendy was talking about too, of being able to open up maybe a conversation with a family. It's a call to action really as well, to bring attention to observe how the baby is when we go into home visits or we meet babies in our practice, to attempt to understand how they communicate. So behavior is their language. So how they are is what they, on an everyday basis. So a baby's early behaviors are the windows into their mind, brain, and emotion. And really we are reflecting on these. So we're reflecting in action. So there's a lot going on when we're working with families here, a lot going on for us, a lot going on in the dynamics and the processes that are present in the room. But infants can be a port of entry, in the middle of chaos, and it's very difficult to really bed down and find the perfect space. Sometimes just to observe how the baby is can invite parents in, and to build a reflective capacity to wonder about their baby. And even us asking questions like, I wonder why she's still finding it difficult to settle, or is there something different happening in his little world at the moment, or what have you noticed? And we're there looking at we're observing, the parent-child dynamic in that space as well, the holding, the looking, the vocalization, the touching, the emotion, and the responses of the baby and the responses of the parent or the caregiver. So the first steps really is to build trust, and creating safety and regulation in a trusting relationship helps to build that reflective capacity, helping parents become more aware of their own experiences and their children's internal experience as well. And, it's only, Freiberg talks about this in her seminal book, Ghosts in the Nursery. It's only when these mothers and caregivers and victims, it's only when their cries are heard that they will be able to hear the baby's cries. So really our function in a lot of these spaces is to hold the parents so they can hold their children and create that nurturing space, that non-judgmental, non-shaming space, and to open up and be with these families. And it is a privilege. So the leaflet invites us to think about domestic violence as a practitioner. When we're in the space, we have a lot going on. So even just this graphic, and it's in the leaflet, it's transferred from the leaflet, so you're thinking about the parent, and you're with the parent, and you're wondering about how they are in the present and about their stories, and maybe giving space for those stories. You're thinking about the baby and observing the baby and delighting in the baby, and, observing the body language and the cues. You're observing the relationship, which is key and foundational in infant mental health work, really looking at the dynamics of the relationship, the serve and return responses, the attunement, the ruptures in the relationship, the repairs, are they present? Does this parent see this child? And why can't these babies cry? Why can't these babies' cries be heard by the parent? So you're wondering all the time, you're reflecting in action. And then in all of it, you're looking at the environment, what's going on around you, and hearing the stories and seeing in real time what's happening. And then as a practitioner, there's a lot going on for us there in that space as well. And we all come with our own stories, and we're not clean slates. So we're bringing all that into the room as well. So moving quickly through these as well. So I suppose we're thinking there's so much complexity in that space. You cannot hold that space alone, and you do need to work through these traumatic experiences with another. And you need to share with, your line manager, your clinical supervisor, or maybe a really supportive peer, and refer to a specialized service as well. In most cases, because it is a very important and specialized area of work. It might also be a place where you might identify new training needed or training gaps. So for me, as a clinical supervisor in this space, I find a model of working really helpful. And I know this isn't on the leaflet, but it's useful to know, both for supervisees and supervisors, that the 7-eyed model fits really well with the 5 eyes that we've taken from the leaflet. And it's something maybe you can check out yourself, but it is quite adaptive and very useful. And a really important part of my job here is to give the feedback from the team, because I shared the animation and the leaflet with them and they offered me some feedback. So I'd like to share some of that with you now. So Suzanne, I'm delighted this animation and leaflet will encourage professionals to bring their attention to infants from pregnancy to preschool who can be unseen or not recognized as being impacted by DV. I think this is the most important part for me. So then Lisa, our master's psychology student on the team, the animation was powerful. What is important about this video is that it comes directly from talking to children, parents, and people who look after them about the experiences. The last line really struck me. I may be small, but I feel it too. And Tracy, it was good the video was from the child's perspective and in their voice. I also liked that the mom was shown to give a strategy to stay safe. So she was in her bubble and she opened up the bubble for her little one. I could see myself adding these resources into training and lectures and to embed this way of working and thinking across sectors. And then Jessie, the animation is unreal. What a fabulous job. It's very clear and really gives the point across. I like how the baby shows different common behaviors like not eating or zoning out. And the older child describing their behaviors hopefully helps adults to recognize why some children act the way they do. So Rhonda, our schools worker, while watching the animation, I thought of the phrase, children can't learn when it feels like their hair is on fire. So the animation gives an insight into the difficulties and mixed emotions children can experience. It states the negative outcomes aren't inevitable and families can be supported to recover, and that's an important message. Helena, the resources can scaffold conversations about how children present and communicate in different settings across our community, not only in the homes. This may lead to parents having more empathy and understanding for themselves, their children, and when parenting in the wake of domestic violence. Grace, our speech and language therapist, the animation and leaflet invite us to pause, think about the baby in potentially very difficult, scary and threatening situations. The language and imagery are accessible and gentle, yet instill a sense of importance, place emphasis on the need to consider the baby, the pregnancy, and the potential impacts on all involved in a sensitive and attuned manner. And it is a call to action within our work. And then last but not least, Jennifer, this video and leaflet show that a baby or child being in the presence of abuse can have a huge impact on them, physically, emotionally, developmentally, socially, and academically, even from the womb. And it's very important to spread this message with the simplicity of notice me, think about me, and ask about me. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure being part of this project. I was delighted to be part of it. And you know, the big message really, I may be small, but I feel it too, really is the last word that I'm going to say for all of us to hold on to. So thank you so much.
And thank you very much, Trish, for your really insightful contribution. And it's wonderful to hear from the practitioners in your team on the ground responding to the value and the use of the resource. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Cormac Quinlan, who is the assistant, and we'll wait till Cormac comes on the screen. Hi, Cormac. And Cormac is the assistant National Director for Practice Reform in TUSLA, and which is the Child and Family Agency. And TUSLA is just the agency in relation to protection of children. It's a key statutory function. And many of us here on the webinar today work very closely in partnership with TUSLA, and it's together that we protect children. Cormac is actually leading extensive stakeholder consultation at the moment in relation to the approach to practice in terms of domestic violence, which is really important. And I know in Barnardos we've contributed to that, and I'm sure many listening today in the webinar have as well, Cormac. And you've been involved in practice since 1997, is that right? Yes. I'm wrong on myself there, folks. You can feel quite young relative to me. There you go. Yeah, so really looking forward to hearing your response to what you've heard and your contribution in general. Okay, so
Thanks a million, Suzanne, and good morning, everyone. And truly, personally, and on behalf of the agency, delighted and honoured to join you all at this really, really important launch here today. I suppose the first thing I want to do is just really congratulate everyone who's had a part to play in this, the mothers, Anya, Sarah, Trish, but I also know there's a whole team of people that goes into producing an animation and material with the quality that you've produced it with. So just my huge admiration to all of you for that work. As I was listening, I was scribbling notes like mad, just to capture, I think, all my kind of thoughts and reflections about all the speakers today and all I've heard. I think probably the first thing that came to mind, though, it's actually quite hard to express, I think, in a few words, I think, the profound impact of what a relatively short animation can address, I think, in terms of the honesty and the real emotional impact, I think, of children's experiences. And I think the undeniable impact of violence and abuse that can have on them, even at the most of early stages of their life. And I think in that way, the animation and the leaflets and all the tools that you've done and represented, and how Trish beautifully represented that in practice, it gives us, I think, all really important tools that help us, I suppose. First of all, I think give a voice to often voiceless children, and challenges that belief that children of a certain age are not impacted or do not deeply feel the impact of violence in their homes and lives. And I think Wendy beautifully reflected on that earlier in her reflections. I think it also challenges this work, and what you've presented today challenges all of us to do more. I think to see more, to sensitively inquire more, and to challenge and ongoing challenge the myths and the secrecy that can be pervasive, we know, around situations of abuse, meaning that children still are often not seen or not noticed in situations. And I was very conscious in the animation, I think nearly underpinning some of the children's voices was nearly a plea as to why they're not seen or why they're not heard, or why can't somebody not notice what I'm feeling or experiencing, or what my family is experiencing and hearing. So I thought that was very profound and moving. Obviously, from an agency perspective, we, along with other fabulous partners like Barnardos and many of the stakeholders, I'm sure, on the webinar today, are responsible for not only receiving concerns about children where they're living in situations of violence, but we're responding to those concerns. And I know everyone here and our own staff work exceptionally hard. And I think, as Trish highlighted in her presentation and work, how highly complex and challenging this area of work is. That means, I know, as an agency, we have to support our practitioners and our practice in a really robust way. And we have to challenge where we're working well and where we're not working well. And I know we've been working very hard over the last while to really think hard about how do we truly make our practice domestic violence informed, so that it is genuinely helpful to children, helpful to the survivors and victims of abuse, and helpful to holding those perpetrators of abuse accountable for that behaviour, so that we can truly begin to address lasting safety for children in their homes and with the people around them who care for them. And I think the work that you've presented here today really supports that intent from my perspective. It raises the issues and makes us discuss them and talk about them in society. I think we've all reflected here today a bit about the awareness is essential if people are to notice, to think and to ask. And it is uncomfortable, and I agree with Wendy and others. I mean, if we can tolerate children experiencing it, I think we have to challenge ourselves more on us being able to tolerate difficult and uncomfortable conversations in this regard, if we're truly going to be helpful to children who need our support and help in that regard. I think the material also gives us language to support identifying and naming the impact of abuse, which is really important, even from our perspective, in terms of protecting children. We need to understand that impact, name it and describe it in ways that everyone understands. And it helps us understand, I think, the longer term impact we see here for children as well, and how that impact can, as people have reflected, go right into adulthood, so that the parents we're working with today may also have been victims of violence, and how that impacts on their ability to manage difficult, complicating situations in their lives today. I think it fundamentally also shifts us away from not only seeing and focusing on physical violence as the thing that hurts children, but how coercive control and emotionally abusive behaviour also has a massively damaging effect, and potentially far more damaging if experienced long over time, I suppose, for children and in their lives. So I also think the material, though, on a very positive level, gives us really good ideas and tools to support us intervening in ways that promote safety. I think that support that strengths-based approach aligned with the mother or the non-abusing parent to support them, because we know working with that parent is one of the most effective ways that we can create true lasting safety for children and continue to build connections of support for that parent and for that child, and that leads to that lasting safety piece. And it also helpfully, I think, helps practitioners maybe with pointers as where to go if you don't know and where to get advice if you're not sure. And I think that's really important for people sometimes in this area that is so complex and is so challenging. Where else can I talk to and who else can I get help from in thinking this through? So on behalf of the agency and our collective responsibility, obviously, to children and families, I just really want to thank you for your massively innovative work that I think will be of benefit to everybody, including our agency and all of our collective work together. So thank you.
And thank you, Cormac, for that very thoughtful and positive reflection on what you've heard today. And I just want to reiterate the point you've made about there being a lot of myths and secrecy regarding the reality of some children's lives and what they're living with, and that this resource, this co-created resource, is so important in the context of challenging that in a way that doesn't demand too much time of people, which I think is very important in the time that we live in, because people don't actually have a lot of time, but certainly it's very accessible. And I just want to say that we really appreciate, all of us, your leadership in the area of practice and practice reform. And as a key person in Thursday in that context, we're all alongside you in keeping children safe and protecting them. So thank you very much for being here today and for what you've said. And what I'm going to do now is just talk to you a little bit before we introduce a resource that's been created by some very brave and courageous mothers who have shared their experience with us in a way that is going to be very helpful for all of us in our work as we aim to continue to ensure that all those who need to receive our support, care and attention are noticed, thought about, and that we ask them what it is we can do to support them. And that is both children, young people and their protective parent, their mothers. And generally it's the mothers, and we need to give care and attention to them. So we will now share that video with you.
Why is she alone? I was a young mother, married young, had children young, struggled young. I was always alone. I was alone at appointments to see how the baby was progressing inside the womb, then out. Good news and bad. Alone until I had a baby or toddler was my only company. Alone in a city I was not from. My village didn't exist. My friendships all broken. My family pushed away. I often wonder why nobody questioned why I was so alone. I would walk for miles to appointments, arrive alone with babies in tow, terrified to be away from them. I couldn't socialise, and nobody was up to the standards he set for me. They all wanted the worst for me.
None of them were good for the children.
I made toddler games of searching for coins along the road until we had enough for milk. Then we'd stop and realise how far we'd gotten. I walked and walked and walked. The house was always tidy, nothing out of place, but nothing in the cupboards. If anyone looked or checked to see why I was always alone, they might have noticed. Noticed that there was beer money and cigarette money, but not milk money. On behalf of women out there, professionals ask more about the support system. Ask where the other parent is, ask where the rest of the family is, ask where friends are. Why was I miscarrying alone? Why was I scared to leave my children at home? Why could I not stay in the hospital for minor procedures, worried about leaving children home?
Domestic abuse survivor and proud mum of 3 kids.
The reality. To the outside, we look like everything is fine. They, the abusing parent, are hands-on when the nurse comes. They hold the baby in public. It looks like they are overly involved. But the behind-the-scenes reality doesn't look like this. Abuse smoulders on in the background, and you're wondering when the next blow-up will come. It withers you. Don't put it all down to new mum exhaustion. What if there was another reason? We might want help, but we are not sure if it's normal. We hope it will get better. We are afraid we are not a good enough mother, and we are terrified of anyone knowing the reality. I'm exhausted, and I feel like I want to die. New mums are like this, but coping with new mum tiredness and living on edge, I showed up to every hospital appointment alone with a baby in tow. I refused essential medical care because I had no childcare, but it should have been an easy decision. I was afraid to leave my child at home or with someone. Maybe these are signs. On behalf of women out there, I ask, notice me. Notice I'm withered. Notice I'm quiet. Notice I'm withdrawn. Notice if I'm disconnected. Take a little more time or ask the right questions, not quick fire tick the boxes. Have leaflets or posters about abuse and where to get help. Information may be helpful. Plant the seed as women are exhausted and baby-brained, scared and confused. Domestic abuse survivor and proud mum of 2 kids.
Ask. Sometimes the victims of domestic violence and abuse and their children are too strong for their own good. They are too good at or too used to hiding everything so that no one ever guesses or suspects what's going on in their lives and homes and what they're experiencing and suffering. But sometimes the cracks do show. Friends, family, colleagues do think that they might see something, a hint, a comment, a reaction, a facial expression. But 99% of the time, those people don't ask the question, don't dare broach the subject, are afraid to open that can of worms, Pandora's box. They're unsure or afraid of what they'd even do if the victim did disclose something. Sometimes the victim is hoping against hope that someone, anyone, will ask the question, but 99% of the time it doesn't happen. The chink of light, that precious moment of opportunity, is lost again. So the victim and his or her children continue to live their oh so difficult lives and continue to hide. Hide the truth, hide in fear from the abuse, the anger, the perceived shame. They have nothing to be ashamed of. They need help to see and understand that. Not everybody gets that help. On behalf of women out there, I ask, this is why we need to burst this blister. Start the national conversation. Open that Pandora's box. Victims need help to throw the curtains open wide and let that chink of light come flooding through, washing them free. And when the truth does come out, those friends and family and colleagues probably feel bad that they hadn't dared to ask. Thank you to all the wonderful people and organisations who help us and free us from our fear and oppression. Please continue to shine the light and spread hope. Domestic abuse survivor and proud mum of 3 kids.
I'm sure, like myself, you would have found that very, very moving, and thank you so much to those 3 mothers who shared their experiences. And I know you may be listening today, so thank you so much. And I think what you're saying is the importance of us being professionals or friends and colleagues to notice you, to think about you, to ask questions, and to give the time and attention to be attuned, to be present, so that we can pick up on what mightn't be said, and that we're available to really listen with care and attention, and to recognize the aloneness, the isolation, and the sadness and as I was going to say as well, the horror of being isolated and not having the resource and support that you need. However, what I want to say and what I loved is in finishing all those contributions was, survivor and proud mother. And I can say, in your generosity, your bravery and courage, we thank you, and you have so much to be proud of. And all of us here who have any degree of resources within us and around us, and the power to share what is so powerful that you have contributed, I think we should do so, and we need to share it wide to ensure that we can continue, as Cormac was saying, to challenge the myths and the secrecy, and to increase on a societal level with our politicians and our key decision makers the capacity to tolerate the reality that is domestic abuse, children and survivors, so that we can do something about it. And as the Minister was saying at the beginning, to ensure that there's zero tolerance. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dagan O'Brien, who is the Principal Officer in the Department of Justice, who funded this resource. So thank you so much for that, for your commitment to ensure that we were able to produce something that is so powerful and impactful. And I know the Trojan work happening in the department in relation to domestic violence and abuse. So thank you for your leadership and contribution. And we're going to leave it for you to be the final speaker of this event. So over to you, Dagan.
Thank you, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to say a few words at the conclusion of the webinar. It was March 23 when we in the department we were able to confirm to Barnardos that we were interested in supporting this project. At the time I thought there were 4 elements that were particularly important in our work of implementing the third national domestic, sexual and gender-based violence strategy, zero tolerance. Excuse me. The first is the focus on children as victims of DSGVB. Second, the impact of trauma, the value of such an animation as a training tool for frontline staff and other staff on the impact of domestic violence trauma on children. And finally, saw a value in the use of the animation as an awareness raising tool for a wider audience also. So here we are at the launch of what is a really powerful animation that delivers a memorable and emotional impact and all the accompanying resource material. At one level, it's an animation and a training and awareness tool and a package of support material. At another level, it's a practical implementation of the commitments we expressed in amending our Constitution in 2015. Article 42A was added to affirm children's natural and imprescriptible rights and the state's duty to uphold those rights. Children have the right for their best interests to be of paramount consideration where the state seeks to intervene to protect their safety and welfare and to be heard. This right applies to all legal proceedings, but the principle is applicable to any circumstances where we intervene or should intervene in a child's life, including when we're putting national policies together. It's not enough for any of us to know what's best. We must hear the voice of the child also. It's also an expression of our UN Children's Rights Convention commitments. The CRC is based, as you all know, on 4 core principles: non-discrimination, the best interests of the child as a primary consideration, the right to life, survival and development, and most importantly, respect, in this context, respect for the views of the child. It was a real pleasure to work with Barnardos, and congratulations to Anya and her colleagues on making sure that the third national strategy was informed by the input of the children and young people from the Empower Kids project, and subsequently on the development by Barnardos of a child-friendly version of the DSGVB strategy. And for those who haven't seen it, this is it here. It's on the government website, and I'm sure it's on the Barnardos website as well. So it was a real pleasure to work with you all on that. As Minister McEntee said this earlier, the current strategy is the third in series, but it's the first that explicitly recognises children as victims, which includes victims by virtue of being witnesses and thereby being traumatised of domestic violence. The animation gives voice to the under 5s. Other age groups are important too. Responsibility for implementation and coordinating the implementation of our national strategy has moved to CUAN, the new domestic violence agency, and I've no doubt that CUAN will want to work closely with Barnardos, as the department has done, in ensuring that we give voice to, that we support, and that we respond effectively at a policy and structure level to children as victims of domestic violence, including other age groups. And the department will want to be part of that continuing and ongoing, what I'm absolutely sure will be a positive working relationship. We have a report from Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and the National Women's Council on the challenges and complexities, including the risks of further intimidation and coercive control that face domestic violence victims where there are parallel criminal, civil and child welfare proceedings arising from the same incident. And the final set of proceedings, family law proceedings, are of particular interest obviously to children. The recommendations in that report are being examined as part of the family justice strategy and by my team in the department, as are the recommendations from the Council of Europe Expert Committee on the Istanbul Convention. We've made considerable progress in the 2 years, and even prior to that, 2 years since the strategy was published. We've substantially completed implementation of most of the recommendations in the O'Malley report on the review of protections for vulnerable witnesses in the investigation and prosecution of sexual offences. But there remains much more that needs to be done to support victims, including children, to reduce delays, to minimise the risk of re-traumatisation within the criminal justice and the family law systems, and to pursue an ongoing law reform programme in this area, which we've committed to doing in the third national strategy. Violence and abuse against children, domestic violence, adult safeguarding issues, human trafficking, which in Ireland is mainly, heretofore at least, been of women and girls for sexual exploitation, are all particularly heinous crimes that prey on the most vulnerable, and they're hidden crimes. I don't wish, and it's not my place, to tell social workers, teachers and other professionals how to do your jobs, but I want to end by stressing the importance, theme that has emerged again and again this morning, of you all knowing what the signs are and what to watch out for. Having that knowledge and knowing to ask the right questions can have a huge impact on those who are suffering in silence. That includes active listening to children at risk of exposure to domestic violence. This animation is one resource for you. There are others. There are training and awareness modules available both within your professional formation and from key NGOs working in this area. There's more work for Garda Síochána and the department to complete. For example, at the moment we are coming close to finalising an examination of how Operation Encompass, which operates in the United Kingdom, can be adapted and applied in this jurisdiction. Minister McEntee will have more to say on that before too long, but I can say that it's really significant that Operation Encompass puts teachers in a position of being able to understand and respond sensitively to traumatic events that have occurred in a child's home life. Finally, congratulations to Barnardos and to Anya and her colleagues again. You've delivered a powerful animation which has a real emotional impact on no doubt that's true of all of us here today. Disseminating the animation will have an impact on many other viewers and make, I have no doubt, a real contribution to changing societal attitudes and understandings so that we do create a climate of zero tolerance for domestic violence in our society and in particular protect child victims. Thank you, and I'm handing you back to Suzanne.
Thank you very much, Deglon, and thank you for your positive reflections on the webinar and its content, and also very importantly putting the work in a policy and legislative context in terms of both the strategy, the domestic violence strategy, but also the reforms to the family justice system, and also, as you were saying, Encompass, you know, and the idea of making the recognition of domestic violence something that all professionals pay attention to. So thank you very much. And as I said, without your support in relation to funding of this, we wouldn't have had the animation. So thank you. And you're put back on again. You thought you were escaping, but I hadn't finished talking. But so thank you. And listen, I'm really glad to know that you're going to still remain a key advocate in the context of domestic violence and children's voice and the appropriate services for survivors as the issue now goes to the responsibility of COOM, but you'll still be there in the context of family justice, and that's really important to us and all of those involved in this project. So thank you very much. And now it's my pleasure just to finish the webinar, to thank you all for your time and attention, to let you know that the resources will be available on our website in Barnardos, but also they'll be emailed to you. And I want to thank, the Department of Justice I just have, but also Tuslan Kuhn and everyone involved in the National Childhood Domestic Violence Initiative. It is such an exemplar in terms of interagency working, recognising that all of us together deliver what we need to for children and families, and we actually couldn't do it without each other. And lastly, and particularly importantly, to the children and to the mothers whose gave of themselves with bravery and courage and generosity in order for us to be able to produce these resources. So a particular heartfelt gratitude to you. And I hope you all take good care of yourself for the rest of the day. Attending a webinar like this does have an emotional impact on all of us, and it's important that we recognise that and are gentle with ourselves and those around us. So goodbye and take care.